Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our Concepts edition. I'm Devin Bedoni of Like and Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing and Arda. And today's quote is, "Brand is the sum of the promise, experience, and memory of interacting with your service." And that's from Xander Nosler.
I like it. We had talked about this prior at one point.
I think it was from like last episode where I was trying to remember this quote and couldn't. So
yeah, it is interesting because I think we think of brand as an entity, not so much an experience or like a set of how would you say it? But yeah, go ahead.
I think that he said it in response. We were talking, and he said it in response to, I forget exactly, but essentially internal versus like something you construct as your brand versus something that lives in the customer's mind, and that's sort of not outside of your control. Obviously, it's in your control through a lot of little things, but you don't just get to like rebrand in the traditional sense of like, look at our new logo, and now we stand for these values, which you can find on our website.
Right.
And that is our brand. It's like, no one cares. Like, that can be your brand,
right?
And that can definitely
well, I think it's also a cool distinction in that, like, we sort of imagine these levers, but it's sort of it's a tenuous connection. And so regardless of what you think you might be doing or getting across or projecting, what they receive and what they perceive is really what matters at the end of the day.
Yep.
And I think we often don't think about that feedback loop of being like, okay, this is what I think I'm saying. What do people actually experience when I say this thing?
It's funny. It's reminding me of pitching any sort of idea or communicating any sort of idea. I always like hearing other people who are not involved with the project sort of repeating what you're saying to like their friend or something, like telling them about what you told.
Right.
And then hearing what stuck and what was it most interesting. And because I just feel like you lose perspective on what your brand represents. I mean, similarly, looking for places on the internet where people are sort of discussing your company, not reviewing your company, right? It's not like on your website when they come to review. It's more like on a forum where people are talking, and it's like, oh, this brand and what people say about it kind of rises to the top. I think, just candidly, we're very good at making, designing and making high performance buckles. I think there is a follow through on the customer service side that is medium. Like, I don't think it's bad, and I think sometimes it's very good, and I always view it as like, I don't mind breaking even on interactions.
Sure.
Like, if there's any issue, I'm just going to make it right.
Right.
Because
we're
not going to lose money on that.
Yeah.
And hopefully you're happy enough, but sometimes things go unanswered. We are having issues with tracking who's owning different customer service tickets, and just like good follow through from getting, someone emails with an issue. Mm-hmm. And then someone replies. That's only the first step in that chain. Then it needs to connect to the production floor or to some next step. And when are those reviewed, and how quickly do we clear them? And we had a pretty bad one a few weeks ago of someone emailing proactively being like, I need our package by this date. It was during the holiday crunch. And I was like, no problem. We got this. And then we missed it by a day. Ooh. And they were rightfully quite annoyed about that. And then we proceeded to mess everything else up after that with that one customer. It was pretty brutal, but live and learn.
You do.
Anyway.
Yeah. Unfortunately, and that can really matter. I think one of my customers had a customer who had a bad experience, not even necessarily because of my customer's fault, presume it sounded like,
according to them.
But this customer of theirs went on kind of a rampage in a small community.
Damn.
And had like a pretty profound effect that they had to actively combat and respond to, not just like one person, but like respond to the community as a whole.
Jeez.
And I think especially in these kind of niche markets, it starts to be like really important.
I think it's definitely important, and I don't think that we, back to the quote, I don't think we are, maybe we're batting 2 out of 3 there, which obviously 66 is pretty bad score. And again, customer service, like, we're not bad at it. I just think we have a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah.
But that is just to say that is a big part of someone's interaction.
Yeah.
Kyle, my co-founder on Arda, is an absolute machine in terms of communication.
I can see that.
And it's kind of crazy, the meetings we get. Like, just because he's extremely proactive and then they reply. And like, for me, it's sort of like I'm busy doing things and somehow those interruptions just, and maybe that's true for him too, I don't know.
Sure.
But like, I just have a really hard time always replying to emails in a timely manner. And stuff falls through the cracks, and even if it's just like I get busy on the CNC or something, and then that's the rest of the day, and then I get to something the next day or 2 days later. Anyway, has an effect as well.
I think I'm pretty good in that regard. Sometimes I see it actually as a weakness because it's sort of like distraction or distractibility. But having said that, I do think that is a strong suit of our company at the moment that does bring business in and is very gratifying to our customers. And goes a long way in like maintaining a good relationship amidst the ups and downs of manufacturing, which always has, mistakes or miscommunications or whatever. Like I am realizing that is one of our strong suits, I think, at the moment, figuring out how to like systematize that so that it's not just me being like squirrel for my email is going to be a project.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Side note. Jump into some topics here.
Yeah. Let's do some topics. So this is just a little observation, but
we got all kinds of stuff here.
All kinds of stuff. I stopped along the way biking to the shop. Well, first of all, we officially moved, which is very exciting.
Congratulations.
But the old shop...
my condolences.
Yeah, it's been a bit brutal. Biking down the highway to the old shop, I stopped to clean up the shoulder.
Yeah.
Because, the thinking goes something like you crash or swerve into traffic, that could mean a significant disruption to production, aside from the other negatives. But I think like doing continuous improvement now for, I don't know what it's been, 3 years or something.
Yeah.
Really has shifted my mindset, where you're just like, oh, well, it's worth stopping and fixing this thing so that to avoid those other issues, instead of just like getting to work because you're meant to be at work.
Sure.
And it just struck me how starting to do continuous improvement kind of has an effect. Like, I know that Toyota puts an emphasis on improving the community they're in. And I sort of thought of that as maybe being proactive is not exactly the word, but maybe just a value they added on top of wanting to be a good citizen. But it also seems like being a good citizen is in your best interest and is like systems thinking. Not that it needs to be, but it's just kind of interesting. Like, if you want everything to be good and fixed, like you're out in public and there's an issue, it's like, well, let's fix that issue.
Yeah. I mean, there's that for sure. There's also just, as soon as you stop thinking about your business as an entity that lives in isolation. And realize the complex web that sustains that business, not just your suppliers, but, your electricity company, the roads that you all drive on to get to work, the people that surround you and would the businesses that surround you, people that are in those businesses that might come to your aid, that might like happen to meet the UPS driver and take a package if you're not there. That's critical.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things go a long way. We had an experience in our new shop when we first moved where, we moved in. I'm like, okay, cool. We're in an industrial space. We're going to like run machines, blast the music. It's going to be great.
Right.
And we share a wall, and the neighbors use that space more or less as office space, and it did not go over well. And as much as I wanted to, tell them to pound sand,
right.
That's not really the best way to move forward. And now the relationship is pretty good, I think. At this point. I mean, it's not like we don't get beers or anything, but it's cordial.
Nice.
Now
that they're used to the spindles.
I think they had like 100% staff turnover of their office staff as well. So
that helps. Everyone came in and were like, "Oh, this studio sounds."
Yeah. Also, it's not very loud.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that stuff really, really matters. We were talking about this on the phone earlier today, but kind of the second order stuff that's harder to see. Like we were talking earlier about like the focus on your spend versus the focus on money that you never made.
Right.
And similarly, there's like, it's easy to spend all your time focusing on the things immediately present, like in your four walls of your business.
Yeah.
And forget about all of this other stuff that, it's hard. It doesn't feel like you don't like generate goodwill in your community and see results the same day necessarily, but over years you probably will.
I guess so. Right. And I don't know if it's kind of cool that it can help everyone to be super selfish. Have you heard about George R. Price? I think there was a Radio Lab episode about him. Brilliant guy, inventor of GPS or a bunch of other things, who then wrote a little piece of math about the genetic interest in being altruistic. So like your gene, like
I have a vague recollection.
Yeah. And he ended up trying to be altruistic truly, like in a way that wouldn't have some statistical benefit to his genes.
Yeah.
And ended up killing himself.
Oh geez.
So yeah, kind of a sad end. But I don't know why that has to be depressing, that like helping other people is also helpful to you. Like,
right. I've been thinking about this a lot with my employees specifically, which is like, obviously there's benefit in creating goodwill with your employees.
Yeah.
But I think most businesses try and ride the line of being like, we're going to do the absolute minimum that we kind of can and have them not revolt, and really trying to like push the other direction. And, obviously like, you can only go so far before you undermine your own foundation. But I think you can go quite a ways before you get there. And we've actually started sort of explicitly stating that, like, we've talked about this for a while, but just this comes up because we had a meeting this morning kind of coming back into the new year, explicitly stating that, like, the purpose of our business is to serve the people that work within it.
Yeah.
And help them create the life that they want to live. And that involves also serving our customers, obviously. And it's not at the expense of serving your customers. Like, that has to happen effectively to make the other thing happen.
Right. And you can't run out of cash.
Like there's practical things that are very, very important that interestingly tend to align with running a good business.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it has to be profitable for that to happen.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. So we actually, since last episode, we hired 3 more people for Arda.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, we've sort of been, anyway. And that's come up a bunch where it's kind of like, we could give them this amount of compensation, and that's sort of the minimum they expect, or we could go above and beyond and delight them.
Uh-huh.
And the difference is not typically huge.
Right.
And it's like, all right, let's just delight them, get them like fired up, make them feel super valued, and not like begrudgingly like, I guess, like I am excited about this. Yeah. And the difference, it's funny, is not big on the like cash equity side.
Uh-huh.
But or you could say it is big. I don't know. To me, it's kind of like not big compared to the benefits in just morale and people being like looking out for the, I don't know, positive outcomes for the company, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's that, I think we talked about it quite a long time ago, but there was that graph, I forget which book, maybe it was the Job Shop Lean, that was like an exploration of like how people that's super cool. Rate different aspects of the business at different parts of their tenure, and wage is super high at hiring. Yeah. And then as soon as someone is hired, its importance drops very low compared to most other things that we consider very soft, sort of like soft skills or like unquantifiable things. And those really start to define someone's experience and happiness in a job. Yeah. And so I think we forget how much like buying your employees lunch or getting them little things or telling them like, take time when you need to take time. Like, you're sick, go home. Not like get out of here, you're sick, but like you don't feel well, take care of yourself. Like those things really in the long run are pretty impactful. Yeah. Is my experience so far. I'm no expert in this. It's just
seem to be doing a good job. So
I'm doing okay. You want to go on a tangent?
Let's do it.
So I had an interesting discussion with my friend. Okay. We were texting about restaurants. And he brought up this like old thing, or I've heard this before anyway, that you can tell how good a sushi restaurant is by how small its sign is.
Hilarious.
I don't know the validity, but like I've heard it many times, and I don't know, you look it up on the internet, people are like, it tends to track pretty well. And it made me, so we got into an economics discussion about like why, how, etc. And it just like looped me back to the concept of like narrowing demand to your target market effectively. And if you think about people walking by on the street, a large sign invites in a lot of people, right? Right. A higher proportion of people are going to see that sign. Yep. And so you're going to get a lot of people who are really interested in sushi and a lot of people who are just kind of tire kicking. And so if you're trying to sell like a premium product,
veggie roll kicking.
Yeah. You've now sort of glutted your market with a bunch of people who aren't really genuinely interested in being there.
That's super interesting.
And so I was just thinking about like different ways to throttle demand and maintain pricing, or not to throttle demand. So leveling production is really what I was thinking about.
I don't know if it's only that. I think it's also, that's an interesting point. I think it's also just making a self-selecting process to exclude people who aren't going to be a good fit anyway. Yeah. And that doesn't matter how far along they go in the interaction if it's not a good fit, right? Yeah. Best case scenario is they turn around and walk back out. But more likely is they sit down to have the meal, everything's a little maybe more expensive, or just like not like the crowd pleasers. That's like, I'm trying to think of a sushi chain, but right. On that topic, I had one of the better sushi meals or Japanese meals I've had in maybe ever. It was really very good.
Locally?
In Seattle.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Recommendation from Avi. So he has not led me astray. Nice. That's interesting. Yeah. So we were looking at our ARTA customers. Yeah. And we used to have a $50 a month plan. Yeah. And like 90% of our problems were or problems being one end of the spectrum are people who just like maybe use the product a bit and then churn, or just never use the product but are paying, which in my mind is not a success. Yeah. And all of our best customers were paying significantly more. Yeah. And so we kind of just doubled our prices across the board because we were getting a bunch of people who, I think at $50 a month, you're kind of like, aspirationally, yes, I would like to improve our ordering. So let's go. But it means that every day when you get to the shop, you're running a small business, you have a lot of things on your to-do list, and making cards is never at the top of the list. Yeah. Right. And so it's just a waste of our time, a waste of their money. Like no one was winning. And now we find that a higher threshold of like, yeah, this is enough of a pain point that I'm willing to shell out more money.
Yeah.
It just, excludes a bunch of people who aren't going to be happy anyway.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Sort of similar. I think there's another interesting question. I enjoy thinking about, genetics and memetics and whatever.
Yeah.
Of like what would be the mechanism for sushi restaurants do they put up big signs and then they're like, shit, we're getting too many people off the street, so they make a smaller sign? You know what I mean? Or is it that they're so focused on sushi that they don't see branding as the main focus of the business? Like what would be the mechanism that would result in smaller signs existing for better restaurants? Or
it might go the other way.
Or which way?
They might all start with small signs, and only the bad ones have to make big signs to stay in business.
Where they're like, we're not getting enough people walking in off the street. Whereas the really good ones, maybe most restaurants start with small signs. That's probably, or start without a big focus on branding.
Potentially.
Yeah. Maybe not most. Maybe that's wrong.
I mean, obviously,
I like that explanation.
We're going a little deep here
truthiness
on things that we don't really know anything about.
No,
but I mean, I think that's also sort of a Japanese or a traditional, maybe not modern, but traditional Japanese tenet is like not to do necessarily like the most flashy kind of stuff in your branding, as it were.
Now I'm completely out of my depths, but from what I've seen, yes, definitely. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So this is a funny one. So, in manufacturing, I am kind of in an ongoing state of shock by the lack of adoption of like lean TPS stuff.
Right.
You're like, the jury is in. It is way better. It's not a little better. It's way better, right? Productivity wise, throughput wise, all the like any measure you care to measure, it outperforms competing methods.
Sure.
Significant, like double, whatever. Anyway. And so it's interesting to me because most people in my world anyway, if they do know about Kanban, it's in the context of software.
Yeah.
And because a lot of TPS has really gotten a lot of traction in software development. Mm-hmm. And now that we're spinning up a software development team more seriously, it's very interesting. So we just implemented sprints, the goal of which is to minimize WIP, to get things across the finish line, like, stop, starting, start, finishing kind of thing. And it's interesting because I think the reason adoption is so much higher in software, at least from what I've seen, is because the risk of WIP is so much more obvious. Like when you're building something, it is so counterintuitive that making progress is just accruing risk until it's finished.
Wait, sorry, say that. Let me.
Like when you're welding something, or like I've been doing a bunch of framing. Yeah, making progress feels good.
Yes.
And then at some point you're framing out a window and then you pick up the window, try to stick it in the hole you just framed, and it doesn't quite fit because you measured wrong, let's say. Yeah. Right. And so you fix it. And the lesson is not, I should have framed one window, then installed the full thing with the flashing and everything. Yeah. The lesson is sort of like, I should measure more or something, right? Like
do better.
Yeah, because it just doesn't feel somehow like building feels like you're making progress, not accruing risk. But in software, I don't know, to me, and this is just like the sample size of one kind of just my initial thoughts, is just these people make a ridiculous amount of money.
Software developers?
Yes, okay. In my humble opinion. And the things they're doing, until you've passed something end to end, you haven't de-risked it. So like you're writing all these APIs and all these,
until it works, it's just expense.
It's a lot of expense, and it might be the wrong direction. It's not like building a house, you're trying to go up, kind of, right? It just seems like, got to frame the windows, got to put in the floor joists, got to, put sheathing on. Yeah. And you're sort of making progress and it's sort of correct. I don't know. And in manufacturing, it's similar, like getting your machine running and cranking parts out, and then you get through them and you're doing that final QC before they all go in the box, and you're like, what is that? Oh God. Like I like straight up missed some contour, right? And that's still like roughing.
Yeah.
Whatever. Or like little things. Or my Op2 fixture is marring parts. And like you didn't give it that deep. Anyway, it's just very interesting. And there's a saying that you shouldn't sell, you should sell painkillers, not vitamins. Like it is way easier to say like, oh, hey, your back's hurting, take this pill, than it is being like, hey, take these pills because over the long run, it's going to keep your back from hurting.
Right.
Or you're like, oh, maybe. I have things that are top of my list. That's not one of them.
What about today?
Yeah. And so I just wonder if like, there's this idea that I've seen on the internet in the realm of continuous improvement around like start with Kanban on your non-essentials, right? Like your cleaning supplies, because just give it a try, get your legs under, like get some experience. I see a lot of people giving that advice. I'm not seeing a lot of people taking that advice because who is excited about like, no, the people we're having success with getting to use Kanban, even though we're not calling it Kanban just because they think it's software.
Yeah.
Are people who are like, I am constantly running out of stuff. It is a huge pain point for my business.
Yeah.
Like we're desperate to try something new, not on our cleaning supplies, but rather on our, the stuff we're trying to ship. And so in software, I just feel like the pain point is so obvious. Like the problems of WIP are so clear and the cost is so high. Yeah. In a way that it's just not in manufacturing. Like no one says, yeah, we just make too much stuff. Like that's the problem with our production floor is it just makes too much stuff. Like that's no one's saying that, even though that is a huge problem. And that's like the mother of all wastes, according to Toyota. Anyway.
Sure. Well, there's also like the cadence of software development in general is very fast, right? Like,
well, it's become fast because they started using lean and agile and
but even before, like, to develop a new physical good, like to develop a new car is years and years. Whereas like if you try and do that in software, you don't have a market anymore, right? Because the market has, what is the root cause? I don't know. The market has driven towards first to market. All markets do to some extent, but maybe just because it is not physical goods and because
distribution is easier for sure.
Distribution is easier.
I don't know. I mean, legacy software businesses, we're legacy. Like,
that's true. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't really know the stats. On the topic of time to market, I had the good fortune to talk to Dan Gelbart, and he said some really interesting things. One, which I was just like, wow, you're working on the right types of projects. He was like, being a year later to market costs a business about $10 million. Which I can tell you my business, it's not costing $10 million. So that's why I say like he's working on the right stuff. I mean, sorry about that.
What are those numbers based on?
So that was just sort of a rough estimate of basically the cost of the team, the opportunity cost, because it's just, another year of not doing something else. Yeah. And then
this is sort of like generic.
This is mostly in medical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Medical. Interesting.
And so that's sort of his rationale for, I don't know if you've watched his YouTube videos on prototyping.
No, I haven't, unfortunately.
They're awesome. And
YouTube
it's sort of
just decided I like stupid stuff. And
this is not, this is really good. Anyway, his whole approach is kind of systemizing prototyping to get it to be the easiest thing rather than like most capable shop, just come up with really easy workflows for achieving complex outcomes, because typically the innovation you're prototyping for is very specific, right? So like coming up with a new way of making a precision structure doesn't matter. Like, and anyway, so I just thought that was really interesting. $10 million. So should optimize your prototyping for
so if you spend $5 million to get there a year sooner, like
so he's kind of like the shop I would spec, and he's built out 8 prototyping shops at different companies are like $500,000 or $600,000.
That's all.
Yeah. And he's like, it can. So he basically like he was saying that people don't understand how expensive that extra time is. Yeah. And so doing things fast is so useful. Making sure that engineers don't have to create drawings to then move to a prototype just saves a huge amount of time. So even if they're slow at prototyping, if you bring it all in-house.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. That is a massive, I mean, like, the more I do this, the more I realize that complex businesses, complex systems in general really are just communication systems.
Yeah.
And so the simpler you can keep it and the less communication required, the faster everything will flow. And there's, I think, different ways to approach that, right? One is to automate the communication.
Yep.
One is to silo things so that communication is not required. Maybe that's just the only two. The third would, I guess, be like, or this wasn't a fully formed thought.
No, I mean, I think it's interesting. Like we've talked about this before, but like you have the flow of goods, and that's most of the focus in manufacturing. But then you also have the flow of materials, and those tend to like cross each other, where one's flowing up to call for stuff, and another's flowing back down, and like it's so easy to just miss the whole information piece. And then at some point, you're like, oh, the information is kind of the biggest.
It
like
is the business, more or less.
Yeah,
tends to be. But that's a huge thing for us. Is we like to get prints from our customers. Most of the fast moving customers provide terrible prints.
Right.
And we do end up needing to have more communication. So the question is kind of somewhere that communication happens, or it's within one person's head. Generally.
I think that's right, but that also feels like a operation focused, process blind. I can totally see why in your shoes you would start requiring more and more rigorous drawings.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're like, no, last time we had a customer complain about parts and they were unhappy, and so it made a bad relationship because they didn't put a particular spec on their part, so we didn't, and then it didn't work and it delayed their project and whatever. So it would be very tempting to be like, okay, well.
Yeah. Or, more innocuous but more typical is often we start a thing, start working on a project, realize we don't have all the information we need to complete the project, and then we're idled while we wait for their response.
Interesting. It's reminding me of a shop tour. I'm forgetting the company. They did electronics, and they had the same issue, and so they made a checklist of all the things they need to get started.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I don't know if that'd be useful, but
communication, sort of like information flow.
Yep. For sure.
I'll have to go back and check out more of his content.
I can probably find it. Yeah. Okay, here's one that's incorrect. But I'll say it anyway. Anyway, I was thinking about like command and control, global optimum.
Yep.
And I had the thought that if you make a plan with a global optimum, any local change results in a global change, which is incorrect, because if you have a bunch of, let's say your label printer for you guys, if it goes down for 3 minutes because it paper jams, it's not at all a critical part of the chain, right? It's not on the critical path. It doesn't delay the project.
Sure.
Maybe it delays it by 3 minutes, but it doesn't. That would be a linear change, right? 3 minutes there is, and it doesn't massively blow up your whole plan. So it's only things that are on your critical path, which is why Gold Rat has a
whole book about
critical chain book. But it is still interesting that an inherent flaw in making a plan to a global optimum is that a change that is on that critical path does cascade into becoming a global change in plan, right? So suddenly if you guys are running, it's like, okay, we'll run that job on that CNC. Suddenly that CNC goes down by 3 days, and you're like, oh, if we don't reprogram this to get on this other CNC, then that other job is also going to be delayed. And suddenly like, okay, you pull off that job that you're meant to run today and help, because we really need this to happen. And so it adds a huge amount, like any savings you might have from the theoretical upside of a global optimum versus a local optimum, I think quickly kind of gets used up when plans change.
Yeah. Well, that's, yeah.
And what I think doesn't really matter. Again, the jury's kind of in on that, but
yeah. Interesting. I had a, no like major aha, but sort of a repeat of our constant theme of actually measuring things.
Okay.
Or like actually doing an analysis and not just a gut.
Like the current state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually have not completed it because there's a lot of data entry, but I started doing an analysis, a theoretical analysis. Analysis is a stretch, really.
Okay.
I started building a spreadsheet where I went through every part that we made this last year and did kind of like a gut check of whether I thought I would be comfortable running that part in a lights out scenario on a pallet pool machine.
Right, because it's so easy to go like, man, if we just had lights out pallet pool, we'd be running every night.
Yeah, or conversely, I've sort of been operating under the assumption that we're doing a lot of work that is not applicable.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yep.
And so this was kind of like is it a viable solution for us? And pretty quickly it became clear that, and this is where like subjectivity and perception just always, every single time I do this, the degree to which my perceptions are subjective is just mind-blowing. We did a lot of work this year that wouldn't work in that scenario.
Okay.
And was very hard.
Okay.
And because it was very hard and took a lot of thought, it occupies the forefront of your thoughts.
Right. So your availability bias is that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I did this analysis, or most of it, and it quickly became clear that like if we had the systems in place to feed a pallet pool style machine, I think we could actually run a significant portion of our work on that machine. And so it was just kind of interesting. It definitely, we took 2 weeks off from work, shut the shop down for 2 weeks. And
very nice.
It was interesting to go into that break thinking about work and thinking about the new year with sort of this potential opportunity on the horizon of actually being able to consider something like that because of doing an actual analysis. So
that's anyway, very cool.
One more feather in the cap for measuring the current state or establishing the current state.
Yeah. I was just going through this with someone. I feel like the 5 questions of Toyota Kata.
Yeah.
We have these things posted around our shop.
Yeah.
Of course, they've become background, and so I never read them. But in moving the shop, I picked them up and read them again. And so many problems, I feel like, in the world and arguments could be eliminated with just going through the 5 questions because... because I feel like everyone's arguing about the mechanics when the goal is unclear. The difference between the current state is not understood. The difference between one and the other is not understood. And what we should try next is not at all understood. It's just like, if we did this, it would do this other thing. And it's like, oh, that's a valid theory. We should add that to the list of maybe things to dig into. Sure, I have no horse in that race.
Yeah. The dingle hopper might move that direction if you add a dingle whopper.
Right. Like, okay, yeah. But do we want it to move?
Yeah.
Have we thought about, is it moving now? Anyway. Yeah. So encourage people to go look at that. It's so helpful. And it's so easy to skip. Like, I skip it all the time, right? You're like, oh, I know for sure that we should buy this machine. And then you go do the analysis and you're like, we did a A3, which involves sort of all those questions on whether to spin our machine around.
Oh, uh-huh.
And it was very interesting because what we found out very quickly, and
recently,
I talked about it,
or a while back?
A while ago, like a year ago.
Yeah.
And now we finally moved the machine, so it kind of brought that whole conversation back up. The orientation of the machine was not at all the point.
Right.
At all.
Yeah.
Like, who cares which way it's facing?
Yeah.
What it does matter is sort of like transit time and availability of information from other areas of the shop, and like visual control. Is the state of that station obvious from other places you might be? And lash and, task switching, like all these other things that really the position of the machine is, just like some optimization of the other things. And anyway.
Right. Really, you're just like, do I want to see what's happening or not?
Yeah.
Like if what I mean is like,
and then there's a lot of solutions to that problem.
Or if you're just considering the machine in isolation, you're really just saying, do you want to look at it or do you not want to look at it? But when you back up from that and you say, what does looking at it mean?
Yeah.
What does looking at it affect?
Right.
What am I actually trying to see when I look at it?
Yeah.
Then you're cooking with gas and you realize that there are many ways to see what's inside the machine.
Yeah.
Potentially. But you probably actually don't want to know what's inside the machine. You want to know.
And also, if we do flip it around, does that actually get
right.
you what you want? Because it doesn't. Typically, it does shorten the amount of the amount of time to go get the answer you do want. But typically, you can't, like, when a machine stops and in your, highly trained brain, it's like, that shouldn't have stopped. Right. And you're like, did it break the tool? Is it actually okay? Does it just need to be changed over? Like, what's up with that machine?
Yeah.
And depending on the answer to that question, you might respond differently.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this is kind of cool. We were at Costco. I was shopping with my brothers who were in town, and one of them got to talking to one of the employees and who was counting people heading into the store at the door. Oh. And he was asking why. They pass that information. They pass an hour, a people count every 30 minutes so that they can adjust the number of registers open.
That is very cool.
Yeah, which is a great example of feed forward, where they're not waiting for essentially a queue to deplete or, whatever you want to say. Instead, they are taking some data into the system and pushing it forward because they have some concept of the effect to the system. Yeah.
But probably also not trying to be like perfectly predictive.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Right.
Yeah, there's probably I feel like where feed forward always gets into trouble is when you try and be exact.
Yes.
Versus try and hit some like approximation.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think like we've talked about this a lot in regards to feed forward, taking actual data from our Shopify site and pushing it forward to tell the CNC department which triggered Kanbans to prioritize.
Right.
And it always runs into like, okay, so now you're gathering that data. Well, what other data could affect that? And then do you start going like, well, we just sold 500 cam buckles, so let's make 500 because we know we sold them. So that is technically pull, forgetting the fact that they might go into the paint department and realize there's a defect. Yeah. And then like, that's part of the reason you don't want whip. Like there's so many other issues, but this is just such a nice example. And there are huge benefits of feed forward also. Yeah. So anyway, I just thought that was a very cool little thing they're doing.
Love it.
I was curious why they picked 30 minutes. Like it might just be convenient.
It might be convenient. It might also be they may have tried 10 minutes. They may have tried an hour, and I'm guessing this was a happy medium between trying to be like overly predictive versus not predictive enough. It also might just be the typical time a person spends in the store.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting they have people there. It feels like maybe Avi should be
filming. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just telling them how many.
Potentially.
Or their capacity or something. I'm not sure. Anyway.
Yeah, they might. Yeah, interesting. Simple. It works.
Yeah. Also, so in talking about Kanban with Dan Gelbart, he was like, oh, you mean the Ford system? And he was like, yeah, people don't realize, but like Ford early on put cards in the bottom of all the bins to reorder. And I was like, man, I have not heard about that. So you recommended a book that I was maybe gonna try to read.
Interesting.
It is called Ford Production. I forget when it was written. Anyway, so I mean, Goldrat talks about like minimizing whip and the different styles, and that like Ford's way of minimizing whip instead of Kanban, which maybe they used Kanban, was spatially with their production line. Anyway,
yeah.
Everyone is smart, as it turns out.
Right.
Yeah. And but Toyota definitely made some improvements there, it seems like.
Classically.
Yeah. Fair. True. Lastly, we've been doing some renovating with the new shop. And
by some, you mean completely?
Well, it is such a, you mentioned this when you were building your shop.
Yeah.
Construction is so brutally not lean. And we are doing it. And I don't know, I'm really like all the things are just hitting so hard of like 90% planning, 10% execution. Like I did not do that. And I was like, the task is trivial, let's just do X, Y, and Z. And then just spin your wheels, build some stuff, realize it's not quite right, take it down, unscrew some stuff, trim it, whatever, put it back up. Like it's just on and on and on.
Yeah.
And then also it's a really interesting balance to try to hit where like you get in there and you're like, oh, we're doing just a little bit of work. So let's just like bang it out.
Yeah.
And then 2 days into sort of like working on the floor, you're like, all right, like let's set up a work table, right? Then you set up a work table and you're like, man, these tools are everywhere. Let's at least get them aggregated at the end of the day back into one spot. And you're like, man, it would be nice if we weren't searching for tools so much. And it's just always hard to gauge where you should be at in terms of how much time you should put into laying the infrastructure versus getting the thing done.
Yeah.
I think everyone's bias tends to be way in the wrong place of like, let's just get it done. Yeah. But then there's also this element that's really tricky around how much you're kind of, I don't know, we talked about this, but like there isn't much about framing that needs to be de-risked. And I think I sort of bring that mindset of like, well, we should just try it and see what's wrong.
I mean, that assumes you know how to do it well.
Yeah, which is a big assumption here. No, I mean, I've done some, but I'm not fast at all. My dad was kind of like, the professionals just like buzz off the thing and just hold their speed square. And I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely not a professional.
No, what the professionals do is they order it all pre-cut.
Yeah, that's very professional and requires a plan.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're making progress. So.
Yeah. We had the same. It continues to humble me, but we're putting in patio drainage, etc. around our house because we've been living in a weedscape, as my wife likes to call it.
Okay.
No, thornscape, I think is what she called it. A lot
blackberries.
Of blackberries, rocks, sand.
Okay.
And so we just kind of started.
Yeah.
With a rough idea, but then it was like, okay, let's bring in the soil now, and then we were like, oh, we have to get the excavator back in here or dig all of this by hand because we didn't think through the whole plan properly.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're like, oh, but what we're doing is minimal. So let's just get it done quickly. And you're like, well, where should they dump it? And then you could easily spend an hour extra that you could have just planned. Yeah.
And then you're like, I'm going to dump this dirt here. And we're like, oh, you can't put that dirt there. So now you're driving the excavator back and forth. It's like,
should have just had a plan and thought through. Yeah.
I should have known what we were doing, I guess, is the solution. We should have hired somebody else is the answer.
I think, that's,
Anyhow,
I have one last thing and we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah.
Listening to Gold Rat.
Yeah.
And just really interesting to hear Knudsen was kind of a G with early mass production. Just cool to hear like the beginnings of it. Like we think about, I don't know, this podcast is definitely like, hard shilling for Toyota for
this
an hour a week. Yeah. A bit. But like all of these techniques are just this long series of innovations and insights.
Right.
And like what Ford did changed the world,
Right.
And
very directly laid the groundwork for what Toyota has done.
It was like specifically a response to Ford that led them in a slightly different direction, but huge, they use the production line, which may have come from slaughterhouses, depending what you read, but
interesting.
Either way, they were de-assembly lines there. Right. But the point is, it's just cool to hear about it. And it's not so like, this company is amazing and does everything.
Yeah.
Like every company has really cool insights and innovation, and it was cool to hear like they got a car, and they got a plane from the military for World War II.
Who did? Ford?
Ford.
Uh-huh.
And they're like, okay, well, how should we make this? And they brought this car manufacturing, lens to the problem. And so they laid out every single operation that had to happen.
Yeah.
And then they laid out a plant with streams that all converged in the right place. And then they were like, okay, what building do we need to house this floor plan? And got it done. But
interesting. I think to shill for Toyota a little harder.
Yeah.
I think the one unique thing that Toyota has brought to this is the continuous improvement aspect, which is why I think they have continued to be at the forefront.
I think that's correct.
Not to say everyone didn't focus on improvement,
right? But then
or
they
developing
improved
their process. But having that as a core, like, central tenet, I think has, undoubtedly, right, been a key piece of them still built. Interestingly, when the Toyota Way was written, I believe Toyota was most profitable, but not largest car company in the world.
Yep.
I looked this up recently, and I believe now they are the largest car company in terms of units sold and maybe gross revenue as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, I should double check that.
And I know that, I don't know about with the latest earnings report, but I know that Tesla sort of took that title for a bit of being most profitable. I don't remember it, but it was like, they're all direct to consumer. So margin wise, that's big.
Sure.
Anyway, there's different elements, and I think Toyota was kind of like, let's wait and see.
Yeah.
We may be seeing.
I believe so, but I don't.
Anyway, I think that's a good place to wrap.
Sorry, just looking this up.
Oh yeah, let's get an answer on that.
Most profitable 2022 Mercedes-Benz was the world's most profitable car company. That's 22. 22 top selling was Toyota. Second was Volkswagen.
Maybe we need to change the name of the focus of the podcast. the Benz production system.
Do we get to buy Benzes?
You do whatever makes you happy. When I was buying sewing machines early on, I got the advice that both Japanese and German sewing machines were really good.
Yeah.
And then when it came time to fix them, the Japanese machines were a third the price to fix. And I was like, all right, well, Japanese machines.
Oh, wow. This is kind of wild, though. Not sure this is legit, but seems to be current. Companiesmarketcap.com. Most profitable automakers. Toyota's number one currently, with double the earnings of the second in line, which is Volkswagen.
Wow.
Stock is double.
All right, I'm back in on Toyota.
Right on.
No, I think you're right. I think continuous improvement and then also training people to do that continuous improvement is a vicious cycle for success.
Viciously amazing.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The numbers. Yeah, it's wild.
Truly. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for listening, coming along for the ride. You can find me at likenprecision.com, lichen_MFG on Instagram. You can find the pod at incrementalci.
And you can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram and austeremfg.com. And Arda is www.arda.cards on the internet and arda.cards on Instagram. And we'll be back next week.